Chapter 1: A Midnight Summons and a Desperate Plea. The gaslight flickering outside our window at 221B Baker Street usually cast a benevolent glow upon the familiar scene of London's slumbering thoroughfare. On that particular night, however, its gentle illumination seemed a stark contrast to the sudden, violent clamour that erupted from our door. I, Dr. John Watson, having been roused from a fitful sleep by the insistent, almost frantic pounding, fumbled for my dressing gown, my heart thumping in a regular rhythm against my ribs. Good heavens, Holmes, who could it be at such an hour? I muttered, peering towards the sitting room where my friend, Sherlock Holmes, already sat upright in his armchair, a volume of forgotten chemistry at his feet, his keen eyes fixed on the entrance. He had, as was his custom, been engaged in some nocturnal rumination, impervious to the need for sleep that plagued lesser mortals. Before I could reach the door, it was thrown open with a force that rattled the very foundations of our dwelling. There, silhouetted against the murky glow of the street lamp, stood none other than Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his usually ruddy face now a pasty white, his bowler hat askew, and his usually precise moustache drooping with an uncharacteristic air of desperation. Behind him, a younger constable shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Holmes! Watson! Thank heavens you're here!" Lestrade blurted out, his voice hoarse with urgency. He stepped into the room, his eyes darting about as if expecting some unseen menace to spring forth from the shadows. "A dreadful business, Holmes, the likes of which I've never encountered. 3 children, Holmes, vanished without a trace from their very beds." Holmes, ever the epitome of controlled calm in the face of chaos, merely inclined his head. "Indeed, Inspector. And I surmise from your distressed countenance and the hour of your visit that this is no ordinary disappearance. Pray, compose yourself and furnish us with the details." He gestured towards a vacant chair, but Lestrade was too agitated to sit. "3 children, I tell you," Lestrade repeated, pacing the worn Persian rug. "Young Master Geoffrey Hargreaves, son of the shipping magnate, little Miss Eleanor Vance, from the parliamentary secretary's family, and Master Thomas Finch, whose father is that reputable solicitor. All gone, within the last 6 hours, from 3 separate residences across London. And in each house, Holmes, in each house, a letter was left. Identical, chilling letters, signed by the architect. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of such an act, not merely one abduction, but 3 coordinated kidnappings, spoke of a mind both daring and depraved. Holmes, however, remained impassive, his gaze intense. "The letters, Lestrade. Have you them?" Lestrade fumbled inside his coat, producing a thick, sealed envelope. With trembling hands, he presented it to Holmes. My friend took it, his long, delicate fingers carefully breaking the seal. He withdrew 3 sheets of parchment, each impeccably penned in an elegant, almost artistic hand. He read the first aloud, his voice devoid of emotion, yet the words themselves painted a picture of chilling malevolence. To the esteemed Mr. Sherlock Holmes, whose intellect, they say, knows no equal. For too long, the grey matter of London has remained unchallenged. But a true mind craves worthy opposition. I present you with a game, Mr. Holmes, one where the stakes are not gold, but breath. Your time begins now. Your charges, 3 innocents, rest within my care, each confined to a box of my own ingenious design, buried deep within the urban labyrinth of your beloved city. They are soundproof, Mr. Holmes, and airtight. You have precisely 48 hours from this moment. Fail to decipher my 10 enigmatic challenges, and their fleeting supply of oxygen will be exhausted. The first 3 keys to their locations are contained within this envelope. Find them, or witness the tragic consequence of your celebrated acumen. The architect. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and Lestrade's ragged breathing. 48 hours. The very thought sent a shiver down my spine. Holmes, however, remained outwardly unaffected. He meticulously examined the 3 letters, not merely their content, but the paper, the ink, the watermark, even the minuscule indentations left by the pen. A truly ambitious villain, Watson, Holmes remarked, a faint glint of professional admiration in his eyes, quickly overshadowed by grim determination. He seeks not merely ransom, but to test my faculties, to play a macabre game of intellectual chess. And he has chosen his pieces with cruel precision. But, Holmes, I interjected, the children. We must go to their homes, search for clues, anything that might point to their whereabouts. Holmes slowly turned his gaze upon me, a flicker of something akin to pity in his eyes for my understandable, if somewhat naive, haste. My dear Watson, the architect has left us no such luxury. He has expressly stated that the first keys are within this very envelope. To chase ghosts in empty nurseries would be to squander precious minutes, precisely as our adversary would wish. He seeks to engage my mind, not merely to evade the constabulary. This is a challenge laid directly before me, and it is a challenge I must answer. Lestrade, recovering slightly, nodded grimly. His right, Doctor. The Commissioner himself ordered that you be brought in immediately. We've set up a command centre at Scotland Yard. All of London's resources are at your disposal, Holmes. Just tell us what you need. Holmes gathered the letters, his fingers tapping a quick, almost imperceptible rhythm on the topmost sheet. Indeed, Inspector. Then let us waste no further moment in this chamber. The game, it seems, has already begun, and the clock, most assuredly, is ticking. With that, Holmes rose, swiftly donning his Inverness cape and deerstalker. I followed suit, grabbing my own coat. The night had suddenly grown colder, and the weight of the city's dread pressed heavily upon us as we stepped out into the pre-dawn gloom, bound for the grim reality awaiting us at Scotland Yard. Chapter 2: The Architect's Gauntlet. The hansom cab rattled through the deserted streets, its clip-clop echoing eerily in the pre-dawn quiet. The urgency of Lestrade's summons had painted the very air with a chill that cut deeper than the late-night breeze. Arriving at Scotland Yard, we found the headquarters a hive of subdued, yet frenetic, activity. Constables, usually boisterous, moved with hushed reverence, their faces drawn with worry. The usual cacophony of officialdom was replaced by a palpable tension, a quiet hum of despair. We were ushered into a large, drafty conference room, where several high-ranking officials, including the commissioner himself, sat around a polished mahogany table, their expressions grim. A large map of London, dotted with pins marking the 3 abduction sites, dominated one wall, an ominous tapestry of the architect's cruel design. The air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and unspoken fear. "Mr. Holmes," the commissioner began, his voice strained, "this is unprecedented. The sheer audacity, the planning required to execute 3 such kidnappings simultaneously, across such distances, it defies belief. We have every available man searching, interviewing neighbors, checking railway stations, ports. And you have found nothing, I presume." Holmes interrupted softly, his eyes scanning the faces around the table. A collective sigh, almost imperceptible, answered him. "Not a single trace, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade confirmed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The letters were identical, as you've seen. No fingerprints save for the parents and our own men. No forced entry. It's as if the children simply evaporated." Holmes nodded, his gaze distant, processing the information. "Precisely. The architect has left no physical trail for the conventional detective. His arena is the mind, not the muddy boot print." He then turned to the table where the contents of the architect's initial package had been laid out. "Inspector Lestrade informed me of the choice presented," Holmes stated, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "To pursue the vanishingly small prospects of a physical investigation at the crime scenes, or to engage directly with the architect's challenge, which, by his own declaration, began the moment these letters were read." He picked up a small, intricately folded piece of parchment. "There are some who might advocate for the former, believing that even the most cunning villain leaves some oversight, some tangible thread. However," he paused, his eyes sweeping across the anxious faces, "this villain seeks to engage my intellect. He wishes to play a game, and games have rules. To deviate from his chosen battlefield would be to concede the first move. The villain seeks to distract us with fruitless chases whilst the clock winds down. I shall not afford him that luxury. My ability to decipher his enigmas is our only true path forward." A murmur of agreement, mixed with apprehension, went through the room. It was a bold decision, a gamble with 3 young lives, but no one dared question Holmes's conviction. Holmes turned his full attention to the objects before him. The architect had indeed provided a formidable initial challenge, a tripartite puzzle designed to test every facet of deduction. The first was a cryptic poem, penned in elegant calligraphy, yet laden with obscure allusions. "Where the great bard's shadow softly sleeps, an ancient stone's a silent vigil keeps. A lion's gaze, where Roman echoes fade, there find the truth the scholar's hand has made." Beside it lay a complex cipher, a square of seemingly random letters and numbers, devoid of any immediate key. It resembled some obscure Elizabethan code, designed for a different age. And finally, a fragment of an old, faded map. It was clearly a section of London, but the landmarks were archaic, the street names unfamiliar, suggesting a bygone era. A single, small X marked a spot on the map, next to what appeared to be the faint outline of a forgotten church or public building. Holmes's fingers danced over them, not touching, but observing, processing. His eyes narrowed, his brow furrowed in concentration. The frantic energy of the room seemed to fade into a dull hum as his extraordinary mind began its work. "The poem," he murmured, almost to himself, "speaks of Shakespeare, no doubt, an ancient Roman presence, a lion's gaze. Not merely a geographical marker, but a symbolic one. It points to a well-known, yet perhaps overlooked, corner of our great city." He then glanced at the cipher, his lips moving silently as if testing various substitution theories. "And this code, it is too elaborate for a simple message. It speaks of a specific methodology, one that hints at a certain academic background for our architect." Finally, his gaze lingered on the map fragment. "The antiquity of this map is critical. The X marks a location that has either been dramatically altered or entirely vanished beneath the modern veneer of London. The architect clearly expects a keen eye for historical topography." Watson watched, mesmerized, as Holmes seamlessly wove the disparate threads together. The initial panic that had gripped me began to recede, replaced by a profound faith in my friend's abilities. Within minutes, the scattered pieces of the architect's opening gambit were no longer mere fragments of paper, but nascent pathways leading through the labyrinth of London. "The three components are not separate clues leading to separate answers, Watson," Holmes declared, finally looking up, a spark of intellectual fire in his eyes. "They are parts of a single, interwoven tapestry. The cipher, I believe, will decode a phrase that, combined with the poetic allusions, will reveal the true significance of the marked location on the archaic map. It is a location where all three streams of thought converge." He picked up the old map fragment, his finger tracing a line. "And if my initial deductions are correct, that convergence point, it lies not far from the very heart of the city, an ironic touch given the nature of this sinister game." The clock at Scotland Yard ticked on, its steady rhythm a stark reminder of the lives hanging in the balance. But in the presence of Holmes, a flicker of hope, however fragile, began to ignite. The first move of the game had been made, and Sherlock Holmes, the Grand Master, was already calculating his response. Chapter 3: The first tick of the clock, the clue of the blue child. The chill of the pre-dawn air bit at our faces as Holmes and I emerged from Scotland Yard. Lestrade, his brow still furrowed with the weight of the city's dread, had seen us off, urging haste. The cab we procured was dismissive of speed, preferring a sedate pace through the still sleeping streets, but Holmes's mind, a whirlwind of facts and theories, was already far ahead. "The poem, Watson," he began, without preface, "combined with the decoded cipher and the antiquated map fragment, points unequivocally to a location steeped in the city's layers of history. Where the great bard's shadow softly sleeps, not Shakespeare's globe, nor his tomb, which are too obvious, too singular. No, rather a place where his spirit of scholarship, of historical record, might be preserved." He paused, adjusting his deer stalker. "Ancient stones a silent vigil keeps, where Roman echoes fade. This speaks of antiquity, of foundations laid by the first builders of Londinium. And our lion's gaze, a symbol of strength, of the city itself. Not a specific statue, I deduced, but rather a heraldic device, a guardian. And that scholar's hand has made." I prompted, my mind racing to keep pace with his rapid-fire deductions. "The Guildhall, Watson," Holmes declared, his voice low but firm, as if the very name held a secret. "The heart of the city's governance for centuries. It possesses an unparalleled library, Roman foundations beneath its venerable halls, and its very crest is emblazoned with the mighty lion." The cipher, once broken, revealed the phrase "beneath the city's heart, where Romans slept." Coupled with the marked X on the old map, which corresponds to the Guildhall's crypt, the solution became irrefutable. Our hansom finally drew up before the imposing Gothic facade of the Guildhall. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the eastern horizon with a bruised purple, but the immense building still held the shadows of night within its deep-set windows. A few constables, dispatched ahead by Lestrade at Holmes's instruction, were already securing the area, their lanterns casting long, dancing shadows. Upon entering, the vast, echoing spaces of the great hall seemed to swallow the sounds of our footsteps. We descended a flight of worn stone steps, guided by a grizzled caretaker Lestrade had roused, into the Roman crypt below. Here, the air was cool and still, heavy with the dust of centuries. The ancient stones, rough-hewn and bearing the marks of time, indeed kept a silent vigil. Holmes moved with purpose, his eye sweeping over the exposed Roman walls, the fragmented arches, the remnants of what was once a grand amphitheatre. He ran his hand along a particular section of the wall, where a faint inscription was still discernible, partially obscured by moss and damp. "Here, Watson," he said, his voice barely a whisper, pointing to a weathered stone that appeared no different from its neighbors, yet somehow drew his complete attention. "The architect, as expected, has a flair for the dramatically subtle. Observe the faint chisel marks, not of Roman origin, but later, meticulously blended." He produced a small penknife from his waistcoat pocket and, with practiced ease, prized open a thin seam around the stone. With a soft click, a small section of the wall swung inwards, revealing a shallow cavity no larger than a man's fist. Inside, nestled on a bed of dry moss, was a tightly rolled piece of parchment, tied with a thin, silken thread. My breath hitched. "The first clue, Holmes!" I exclaimed, the weight of the ticking clock pressing down on me with renewed force. Holmes retrieved the parchment with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a priceless artifact. His fingers, ever so gently, untied the thread and unrolled the scroll. As his eye scanned the text, a flicker of something, perhaps a mixture of relief and deepened resolve, crossed his features. "Two more enigmas, Watson," he stated, handing me the parchment. "The architect maintains his macabre game." I took the scroll and read, my heart pounding in my chest. Enigma 4: Location of the first child. Where steel giants once sang their rhythmic moan, and dark breath clung to damp cold stone, beneath London's pulse, now silent, deep, a forgotten tunnel dreams while innocents sleep. Enigma 5: Pathway to the next clue. From the stage where monarchs watched the mimic play, to the forgotten river's shadowed way, seek where the playwright's spirit still resides, and painted eyes watch London's turning tides. A hidden niche, behind the velvet rope, holds the next whisper of my cruel hope. Beneath London's pulse, now silent, deep, I murmured, my gaze fixed on the first enigma. A forgotten tunnel, it speaks of the disused railway lines, perhaps the old post office railway, or one of the many abandoned tube sections, where steel giants once sang their rhythmic moan, the trains. Holmes nodded. Precisely. A disused railway tunnel or possibly a hidden coal vault, common beneath the older parts of the city. A place where ventilation would naturally be poor, thus accelerating our adversary's timeline. This, Watson, is our first true destination for one of the children. It is a direct route, for the time for further abstract deduction for this particular life has elapsed. He then looked at the second enigma, the one leading to the next primary clue. And the architect, ever the showman, points us towards the theatrical heart of London, intertwined with a forgotten river. The Fleet Ditch, perhaps, or another subterranean stream that weaves its way beneath the grand establishments of the West End. Where the playwright's spirit still resides, not a simple theatre, but one with history, with portraits, perhaps a gallery of theatrical personages. But the first child, Holmes? I pressed, glancing at my pocket watch. Hours had already slipped away. The faint light outside was growing stronger. We must alert Lestrade and proceed immediately. Indeed, my dear Watson, Holmes replied, already moving towards the crypt's entrance, his mind already formulating the next steps. But our journey for the first child is only half begun. The architect's network is vast. Let us pray our speed is greater than his intricate planning. With the parchment carefully tucked into his inner pocket, Holmes led the way out of the ancient crypt, leaving the silent vigil of the Roman stones behind and stepping back into the urgent, waking world of a city holding its breath. The first true tick of the clock had echoed, and the race had truly begun. Chapter 4: A Race Through the Night, the First Child Found. The Guildhall's ancient stones melted into the urban sprawl as our hansom, now joined by a police phaeton carrying Lestrade and several constables, sped through the waking city. Holmes, remarkably, had already pinpointed the most probable location for the first child from the myriad disused railway lines and forgotten subways crisscrossing London. His finger, tracing a path on a detailed map of the underground networks, had stopped at a section of the old London and Greenwich railway line, abandoned decades ago, known to have a particularly damp and airless tunnel beneath the labyrinthine alleys of Southwark. The description where steel giants once sang their rhythmic moan fits the railway, Holmes explained, his voice concise, and beneath London's pulse, now silent, deep speaks to a forgotten, disused line. But it is dark breath clung to damp cold stone which is the critical phrase. It suggests not merely disuse, but a profound lack of ventilation, accelerating the depletion of oxygen. Lestrade, pale but resolute, barked orders to his men. The urgency in Holmes's tone was infectious, igniting a fresh spark of determination in the weary constabulary. The sun had risen, casting long, weak shadows across the cobbled streets as we disembarked near a derelict warehouse district. The entrance to the tunnel was an almost imperceptible fissure in a crumbling brick wall, disguised by years of neglect and overgrown ivy. It was a place the casual passerby would never notice, perfectly suiting the architect's cruel design. "Proceed with caution, Inspector," Holmes advised, producing a powerful bullseye lantern and leading the way. "Our adversary is ingenious, he may have left further traps or diversions." The air inside the tunnel was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth and disuse. Our lanterns cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing walls slick with moisture and a floor covered in grit and occasional puddles. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water and our own careful footsteps. The hour since Lestrade's midnight summons weighed heavily on us all, the image of the children in their suffocating boxes spurring us forward. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a quarter of an hour of navigating the claustrophobic passage, Holmes suddenly halted. He knelt, shining his light on a patch of uneven floor beside a crumbling support pillar. "Observe, Watson," he whispered, pointing. "The earth here is disturbed. Recently. And note the precise, almost surgical manner in which the strata have been replaced. Our architect is as meticulous in his burial as in his enigmas." The constables, now armed with spades and crowbars, began to dig under Lestrade's supervision. The work was slow and arduous in the confined space, each scrape of the shovel echoing ominously. My heart hammered against my ribs, fearing what they might uncover, or fail to uncover. The clock was a relentless hammer in my skull. Then, with a grunt, one of the constables struck something solid. A cheer, ragged but heartfelt, rose from the men. Within minutes, a dark, wooden object began to emerge from the earth. It was a box, perhaps 5 feet long and 3 feet wide, crudely yet robustly constructed, held together by heavy iron bands. It seemed eerily small for a living child. "Careful now," Holmes commanded, his voice sharp with suppressed excitement. "Do not damage it more than necessary. There may be further clues upon its surface." With a final heave, the box was freed. It was sealed tight, no visible cracks or vents. Lestrade quickly prized open the lid with a crowbar, revealing a small, pale face within. Young Master Geoffrey Hargreaves lay curled inside, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and faint. His face was streaked with dirt, but he was alive. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. The constables let out a collective sigh, some even wiping away tears. Holmes, however, remained focused. He leaned in, checking the boy's pulse, then carefully scanned the interior of the box. His keen eyes quickly spotted something small tucked into a corner, beneath the boy's outstretched hand. It was a folded piece of paper, held in place by a small, lead weight. The architect's congratulation, no doubt, and his next challenge, Holmes muttered, retrieving the paper with careful precision. Lestrade immediately called for medical assistance for the boy, who was carefully lifted from his confinement and brought towards the tunnel entrance. A faint moan from Geoffrey, though weak, was music to our ears. Holmes unfolded the new message Enigma 6, and read it aloud, his voice now tinged with a fresh layer of grim determination. "A commendable swiftness, Mr. Holmes. The first piece has been retrieved from my board. Yet the clock, like London's river, flows relentlessly onward. For the second, seek the place where the city spirit finds its voice, where orators thunder, and the masses rejoice. Not in grand halls, nor temples of the word, but where common tongues are passionately heard. Beneath the gaze of heroes, carved in stone, a forgotten cipher makes its silent moan. A brief, almost imperceptible nod from Holmes acknowledged the partial victory. His eyes, however, held no trace of satisfaction, only the cold, hard glint of intellect already dissecting the architect's next cryptic pronouncement. "The spirit of the city, Watson," he mused, tapping the paper. "Public discourse, rhetoric, and heroes carved in stone. It seems our adversary wishes to guide us to a place of public assembly, one with its own historical monuments. And the forgotten cipher suggests a physical inscription, perhaps one overlooked by the casual eye." He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "Our time is still perilously short, Watson. This relief, though sweet, is but a fleeting distraction. 2 more children await, and the architect, as promised, grows bolder in his game." With Geoffrey now safely on his way to medical care, the weight of the remaining task settled upon us anew. Holmes turned and, without another word, strode back towards the mouth of the tunnel, his mind already miles away, navigating the next turn in the architect's cruel labyrinth. Chapter 5: The Shadow of the Second Enigma. The journey back to Baker Street from the gritty confines of Southwark felt longer than the outward trip, despite the speed with which our cabby navigated the emptying streets. The early morning light, though promising, held little cheer for us. Master Hargreaves was safe, his oxygen supply barely replenished, but the faces of 2 other children still haunted my thoughts. Holmes, beside me, was already lost in thought, his eyes distant, his fingers drumming an unheard rhythm on his knee. We bypassed Scotland Yard, Holmes having no patience for the inevitable inquiries and congratulations. "Every minute spent reporting is a minute stolen from the rescue, Watson," he had stated, his voice clipped. "Lestrade can manage the boy's safe return, our task lies ahead." Back at 221B, the familiar clutter of our rooms provided a strange comfort, a stable anchor in the swirling chaos of the architect's game. Mrs. Hudson, bless her soul, had left a pot of strong coffee brewing, its aroma a welcome balm. But there was no time for idle comforts. Holmes immediately cleared a space on his table, spreading out a vast array of maps, gazetteers, and obscure historical tomes from his private collection. "Enigma 6, Watson," he declared, holding aloft the parchment retrieved from Master Hargreaves's box. "Our current focus. Where the city spirit finds its voice, where orators thunder, and the masses rejoice. Not in grand halls, nor temples of the word, but where common tongues are passionately heard." This, undoubtedly, refers to a place of public gathering, a forum for discourse. Speaker's Corner comes to mind, or perhaps a more historically significant square. "And are beneath the gaze of heroes, carved in stone?" I offered, poring over a large-scale map of Westminster. "Parliament Square, perhaps? It is replete with statues of prominent figures." Holmes nodded, his eye scanning a tome on London's monuments. "A strong possibility, Watson. Gladstone, Disraeli, Palmerston, all heroes, all carved in stone. But the phrase "a forgotten cipher makes its silent moan" is key. It implies something overlooked, an inscription perhaps, or a device hidden within the very fabric of one of these monuments. The architect delights in these subtle taunts, challenging our powers of observation as much as our intellect. The hours that followed blurred into a relentless pursuit of knowledge. I assisted Holmes, cross-referencing maps with historical accounts of public protests and speeches, searching for any mention of peculiar inscriptions or unusual features on the bases of the statues in Parliament Square. Holmes, meanwhile, devoured biographies of the commemorated figures, seeking connections, anomalies, anything that might link them to a forgotten cipher. The difficulty of this puzzle felt distinctly greater than the first. The clues were broader, more abstract, demanding a deeper immersion into London's cultural and historical fabric. The architect was indeed escalating his challenge. As the clock on our mantelpiece chimed the midday hour, marking the precise halfway point of our 48-hour deadline, a rare flicker of exasperation crossed Holmes's face. He slammed a heavy volume shut, the unusual sound jarring the quiet intensity of the room. "Confound it, Watson! The architect is too clever by half. The common interpretations lead to dead ends. Every known inscription in Parliament Square has been documented, every plaque catalogued. There is no forgotten cipher in plain sight." I watched him, knowing better than to offer a suggestion at such a moment. Holmes paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in a deep V of concentration. His eyes darted from the window to his books, then to the fireplace, as if seeking inspiration from the very air. Then, he stopped abruptly. His gaze fell upon a dusty, framed print above the mantelpiece, an old, rather poor engraving of a grand, somewhat theatrical procession at the unveiling of the Albert Memorial. "The Albert Memorial," he whispered, a new light dawning in his eyes. "Not Parliament Square, Watson, but a place of equal public significance, often overlooked in the context of political oratory. Kensington Gardens. Where orators' thunder is not literal, but figurative, a monument to national achievement, a statement. And that gaze of heroes? The hundreds of figures adorning the base, representing arts, sciences, industry, and engineering. And the common tongues passionately heard, the everyday populace, who admired the Prince Consort, who thronged to witness its dedication." He snatched up a fresh map, his finger tracing a line to Kensington Gardens. "And that forgotten cipher, it has to be part of the monument itself, but one that is not immediately obvious. Something small, perhaps a misplaced letter, an intentionally ambiguous symbol, or a dedication that has fallen into obscurity." We quickly obtained a detailed architectural plan of the Albert Memorial from Holmes's archives. His eyes pored over the intricate diagrams, his mind constructing a three-dimensional model of the monument. Suddenly, he jabbed a finger at a particular section of the pedestal. "Here, Watson. The frieze of Parnassus, depicting a pantheon of poets, painters, sculptors, and musicians. Among them, a carving of one of the early English playwrights, largely forgotten by the general public, his name almost obscured by centuries of grime and weathering. And beneath him..." Holmes paused, a grim smile touching his lips. A small, almost imperceptible symbol, not part of the original design, but carved later. A tiny, almost microscopic rendition of a bee. "A bee?" I questioned, bewildered. "Precisely. the symbol of a particularly obscure Elizabethan literary society, whose members often used such ciphers in their correspondence. And this symbol, when deciphered through a method I recall from a monograph on Elizabethan cryptography, leads us not to a location, but to an object. An object hidden, I suspect, within the memorial itself, or within the immediate vicinity, which will contain the actual location for the second child. The architect's game is one of layers, Watson, each puzzle revealing not the answer but the next question. The realization was electrifying. Holmes had once again pierced the veil of the architect's cunning. The forgotten cipher was not a message on the monument, but a symbol leading to a method of decoding, pointing to an object, which in turn held the crucial information. So, the B symbol, when applied to a text associated with that obscure playwright, will yield the next set of clues. I surmised. Not quite, Watson, Holmes corrected, already reaching for his cape. The B, as a symbol, is the forgotten cipher. It is a key. And that key, I now surmise, unlocks a hidden compartment or a specific item within the vicinity of the memorial, one carefully chosen to be overlooked yet readily accessible to one with eyes to see. That object will contain Enigma 7 and 8, the direct location of the second child, and the path to the third. He snatched up his magnifying glass. The clock had now ticked past the 12-hour mark, leaving less than 36. But Holmes was invigorated, his mental engine humming with renewed purpose. Come, Watson. To Kensington Gardens. The architect's cruelty deepens, but so too must our resolve. Chapter 6: The Cruelty of the Architect, the Dilemma of the Second Child. The hansom cab, urged on by Holmes's imperious wave and a generous shilling, fairly flew through the morning streets towards Kensington Gardens. The sun, now fully risen, cast a golden light upon the grand Albert Memorial, making its intricate carvings and gilded spire shimmer against the clear sky. It was a monument to Victorian pride and ingenuity, yet to us, it was merely another battleground in the architect's merciless game. We disembarked, paying the driver with barely a glance, and made our way towards the colossal structure. Even in its faded glory, the memorial was breathtaking, a towering testament to Prince Albert's legacy, adorned with countless figures representing the arts, sciences, and industries of the world. The very spirit of the city, Watson, Holmes murmured, his eye sweeping over the detail, but where lies the forgotten whisper? He led me directly to the frieze of Parnassus, a continuous band of figures wrapping around the base, depicting 169 composers, poets, painters, and sculptors. His gaze, however, was not on the more famous luminaries, but on an obscure corner, tucked away on the west side, easily overlooked by the casual tourist. Here, Watson, he pointed, his finger tracing a worn figure of a man with a quill, his face weathered by the elements. Thomas Kyd, the Elizabethan dramatist. Not Shakespeare, nor Marlowe, but a significant figure in his time, often forgotten by the broader public. And look closely at the hem of his tunic, near the scroll in his hand. Indeed, almost invisible amidst the intricate folds of the stone drapery, was a minuscule carving. It was an unmistakable bee, its body and wings no larger than a child's fingernail, yet perfectly rendered. It was the forgotten cipher Holmes had deduced. With practiced precision, Holmes produced a small, artist's brush from his ever-present toolkit, carefully dusting around the symbol. As he did so, a faint line became visible around a small, rectangular section of the stone immediately beneath the B. It was a cunning piece of work, designed to blend seamlessly with the monument's facade. Applying a tiny amount of pressure with a thin metal probe, the small section clicked inwards, revealing a shallow cavity no bigger than a matchbox. Inside, nestled on a tiny square of velvet, was not a scroll, but a small, tarnished silver locket, suspended from a delicate chain. Holmes retrieved it, his fingers carefully examining its surface. The architect's theatricality continues, he observed, pressing a barely visible catch on its side. The locket sprang open, revealing two tightly folded slips of paper. Enigma 7, location of the second child. Where glass walls once caught the sun's embrace, and tropical wonders held their fleeting grace. Now silence reigns, and leaves begin to choke, a dying dream beneath a shattered oak. Seek the oldest banyan, where green shadows fall, and hear a faint despair beyond the crumbling wall. Enigma 8, pathway to the next clue. From the ancient river's shadowed, eastern quay, where fortunes rose and fell upon the sea. A merchant's ledger, bound in darkest hide, holds secrets buried where the ships once ride. Seek the house of whispers, close by Thames' flow, where tales of empire silently still grow. A disused glass house, I surmised, my heart sinking at the thought of another confined space. Tropical wonders, shattered pain. And the oldest banyan, Kew Gardens, Holmes. One of the vast old conservatories there, perhaps one that has fallen into disrepair. Holmes nodded, already pocketing the locket. An excellent deduction, Watson. And the phrase faint despair beyond the crumbling wall suggests another location of limited ventilation. The architect is consistent in his methods of cruelty. He immediately dispatched a constable with precise instructions to Lestrade, detailing the location in Kew Gardens and urging maximum haste. Within minutes, we were once again in a cab, hurtling through the streets, the sense of urgency now almost suffocating. The second child, Eleanor Vance, depended on our swiftness. Upon arrival at Kew, the police contingent, already alerted, was waiting. We located the glass house Holmes had specified, a magnificent, yet now derelict, Victorian conservatory, far from the main tourist paths, its iron framework rusted and many of its glass panes shattered. Wild vines had encroached upon its structure, and the air within was stagnant and heavy. The oldest banyan, Holmes pointed, indicating a colossal, ancient tree, its aerial roots descending like natural columns, forming a dense, shadowy grove within the decaying structure. The architect, as ever, chooses a landmark within the larger landmark. The search was intense. The echoing silence of the glass house was unnerving, broken only by our footsteps and the distant cries of birds. The heat, trapped by the remaining glass, was stifling. We probed the thick foliage around the banyan's roots, the crumbling brickwork of the greenhouse's foundation. It was Lestrade, his face streaked with sweat and grime, who let out a cry of triumph. "Here, Holmes! Hidden beneath this root!" Just as with the first child, a carefully camouflaged section of earth yielded to their shovels. This box, however, was smaller, perhaps 3 feet in length, and appeared even more crudely constructed, sealed with pitch. When they managed to pry it open, a gasp went through the group. Little Miss Eleanor Vance lay curled up, barely conscious, her small face alarmingly pale, her lips tinged blue. Her breathing was almost imperceptible. She was far weaker than Geoffrey, a grim testament to the architect's calculated timing. There was a frantic call for the medical team, who rushed forward, immediately administering oxygen. As Eleanor was carefully lifted out, a small, stiff piece of folded paper, weighted by a heavy bronze button, dropped from beneath her arm. Holmes retrieved it, his expression hardening. This was Enigma 9. Enigma 9, the architect's provocation and final clue. 2 birds from the cage, Mr. Holmes, your hands have deftly freed. Yet the finest trick, I fear, is still my darkest deed. Your celebrated mind, a beacon, bright and grand, but does it recall that case of the crooked man, the truth you left unsound? A shadow of doubt, a flicker of regret, this final child awaits where your own failure is set. Look to the place where London's greatest sorrow sleeps, where silent mourners watch and lonely vigil keeps. The finals box, for those who understand, is sealed by your own past, a chilling sleight of hand. A chill that had nothing to do with the stale air of the glass house ran down my spine. The architect had not merely taunted Holmes, he had struck a deeply personal blow. The case of the crooked man was one of the few instances where Holmes, though solving the mystery, had been left with a lingering sense of disquiet, a feeling that justice, in its purest form, had not been entirely served. To invoke it now was a cruel, brilliant stroke. Holmes's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching almost imperceptibly. For the briefest moment, his eyes held a flicker of something akin to genuine anger, a raw emotion rarely seen. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. The architect was not merely playing a game, he was seeking to dismantle Holmes's very confidence. A subtle and insidious hand, Watson, Holmes stated, his voice low and dangerous. He not only challenges my intellect but seeks to poison my spirit. London's greatest sorrow sleeps. This points not to a specific place of mourning for a person, but perhaps a collective grief, a memorial to a tragedy, or a place where many sorrowful events have occurred. He folded the paper carefully, his eyes distant, already sifting through the archives of his memory, not just for clues of London, but for the echoes of his own past cases. The satisfaction of rescuing Eleanor was already a ghost, overshadowed by the venom of the architect's final challenge. The clock continued its relentless march, and now, a new, far more personal layer of dread had been added to its ominous ticking. Chapter 7, The Hour Final, The Unraveling of the Labyrinth. The familiar sanctuary of 221B, Baker Street now felt less like a haven and more like a cage. The hands of the mantelpiece clock swept relentlessly onwards, ticking away the final 12 hours of the architect's grim ultimatum. Eleanor Vance was recovering, but the image of her blue-tinged lips, a cruel testament to the near failure, was seared into my mind. Holmes, seemingly oblivious to exhaustion, had immediately plunged into the labyrinth of Enigma 9, the paper spread before him on the dining table, surrounded by an ever-growing constellation of reference books. "He strikes at the heart, Watson," Holmes murmured, his eyes narrowed, fixed upon the lines that invoke the case of the crooked man. "He knows my vulnerabilities, my few lingering disquietudes." To connect this vile act to that particular truth, it is not merely intellectual challenge, but a venomous personal thrust. I had never seen Holmes quite so rattled, though his outward composure remained almost faultless. The memory of the crooked man case, where a just vengeance had taken a tragic turn, had always been a source of quiet contemplation for him, a reminder that the path to truth did not always lead to satisfaction. The architect had cunningly used this Achilles heel. "London's greatest sorrow sleeps, where silent mourners watch and lonely vigil keeps," Holmes repeated, almost to himself, his finger tracing the words. Not a specific person's death, Watson, nor a celebrated monument. This speaks of a collective sorrow, a profound and perhaps unacknowledged grief. And lonely vigil keeps suggests a place of the forgotten, the unmourned, those whom society has deemed unworthy of grand ceremony. He rose and began to pace the room, his mind clearly racing through countless possibilities. The gaslight cast his shadow long and flickering against the walls, mirroring the tumultuous thoughts within. "The case of the crooked man," he continued, "was a story of a past wrong, a betrayal hidden for decades, culminating in a violent, desperate justice. It spoke of how society's respectable facade often conceals deep, festering wounds. The truth I left unsanded was perhaps not the criminal truth, but the deeper, societal truth of neglect and the corrosive power of unaddressed injustice. What place in London embodies such a sorrow, such a profound accumulation of forgotten injustice?" My own thoughts turned to the great cemeteries, the grand cathedrals. But Holmes dismissed them with a shake of his head. "Too public, Watson. Too grand. This is a sorrow that sleeps, that is overlooked, perhaps intentionally so." His eyes suddenly landed on a dusty volume on the shelf, an old, rather morbid history of London's less salubrious districts and their forgotten institutions. He pulled it down, flipping through its pages with an almost frantic energy. He stopped at an etching, a stark, simple depiction of a walled-off patch of ground, densely packed with grave markers, many barely more than wooden staves. The caption beneath it read, "Crossbones Graveyard, the final resting place for the outcasts of Southwark." "Here, Watson!" Holmes exclaimed, his voice sharp with the thrill of discovery, a new, vital energy coursing through him. "The perfect convergence!" This burial ground, long since closed, was for the single women, a euphemism for the prostitutes of the liberty of the clink, and the paupers, the destitute, the forgotten children of London. A place where common tongues were passionately heard only in their cries of desperation, and where our heroes carved in stone are replaced by nameless, unloved graves. It is a place of London's greatest, most unacknowledged sorrow, a monument to human misery and societal failure. He paused, a grim satisfaction settling upon his features. "And the chilling sleight of hand by which the box is sealed by my own past. The crooked man was a victim of injustice, forced into anonymity and suffering. This graveyard is filled with such victims, anonymous in death as in life. The architect knows my propensity to observe what is not there, what is omitted, He expects me to search for an obvious hiding place, but the true location will be concealed in the very anonymity, the very absence of prominence. Holmes consulted a detailed map of the Southwark area. Crossbones Graveyard, now a mere garden, but its history runs deep. The architect expects me to seek an elaborate hiding place within the burial ground, something architecturally significant. But if it is sealed by my own past, by my experience with hidden injustices and overlooked details, then the hiding place will be in plain sight, yet utterly disguised by its very lack of distinction. His eyes gleamed, radiating an almost frightening intensity. He is not merely taunting me with a past case, Watson. He is reminding me of a particular lesson from that case, that the most profound truths, and the most cunning deceptions, are often found not in the grand pronouncements, but in the subtle omissions, the forgotten corners, the unregarded lives. The third child will be hidden where one expects nothing of significance to be found, where the sorrow is so pervasive that any single anomaly would be absorbed. The clock struck the midnight hour. Less than 8 hours remained. The realization had come, a brilliant, terrifying flash of insight. The architect, in his twisted game, had not merely challenged Holmes's intellect, but had dared to plumb the depths of his moral being. And in doing so, he had, ironically, provided the ultimate key. To Southwark, Watson, Holmes declared, snatching up his cape. To the House of Whispers, indeed. For within that silent acre of London's forgotten grief, we shall find not only the last child, but perhaps a fleeting glimpse into the tormented soul of the architect himself. The pursuit was no longer merely a race against time, it was a desperate quest for redemption, for the very soul of justice, played out in the unforgiving heart of London. Chapter 8: The Denouement, Triumph and Escape. The final sprint to Crossbones Graveyard was a desperate dash against the encroaching dawn and the relentless ticking of the clock. Our cab, joined by a small contingent of Lestrade's swiftest men, tore through the narrow, twisting lanes of Southwark. The area, even in the morning's nascent light, exuded an air of forgotten lives and lingering sorrow, a perfect, desolate stage for the architect's ultimate cruelty. Crossbones was not a grand, manicured cemetery, but a bleak, unassuming patch of ground, hemmed in by brick walls and overlooked by tenement houses. Its rough wooden gate, adorned with faded ribbons and trinkets left by local mourners, creaked open under Lestrade's impatient hand. Inside, the air was still and cold, heavy with the silent history of countless unnamed souls. Simple, weathered stones, or often no markers at all, covered the uneven ground. It was indeed a place where London's greatest sorrow slept, utterly devoid of the grand memorials that usually signify heroic deeds. He will not have chosen a prominent spot, Inspector, Holmes instructed, his voice low but firm, his eyes already sweeping the desolate landscape. He spoke of my failure, my past. He will have hidden the child where one's eye glances over, where the very anonymity of the place provides the camouflage. Look for no grand crypt, no marked grave, but rather a spot of utter, unremarkable commonness. The constables spread out, their lanterns cutting weak paths through the mist that still clung to the ground. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. Less than an hour remained. The thought of that final, innocent life fading away in a buried box was unbearable. Holmes moved with a preternatural speed, not searching haphazardly, but following an invisible thread of logic. He walked towards the eastern wall, where the ground sloped slightly, a patch of earth indistinguishable from any other, overgrown with sparse, hardy weeds. There was no stone here, no visible sign of disturbance. Yet, Holmes stopped. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing the damp soil. "Here, Watson," he whispered, a grim satisfaction in his tone. The very essence of the architect's final taunt. A place so utterly unremarkable, so devoid of any feature that would draw the eye, that its very insignificance is its disguise. It is here that London's unacknowledged sorrow is deepest, and here that he believes my failure is most poignant. Lestrade and his men, directed by Holmes's precise instructions, immediately began to dig. The ground, though initially resistant, soon yielded to their concerted efforts. The tension was excruciating, each shovelful of earth a count of precious seconds. I found myself gripping my walking stick, my knuckles white, my gaze fixed on the slowly deepening excavation. Finally, with a dull thud that resonated through the still air, a constable's spade struck wood. A collective gasp rippled through the small group. This box, unlike the robust construction of the first or the roughly sealed second, was thin, almost fragile, and disturbingly small. It was painted a dull, faded blue. "Careful, men!" Holmes commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "Do not delay." The earth was frantically cleared. The lid, crudely fashioned, was prized open by a desperate hand. Inside, curled into a tight ball, lay little Master Thomas Finch, his face ashen, his breath coming in shallow, shuddering gasps. He was barely conscious, his eyes fluttering open and then closing, the faintest whimper escaping his lips. He was moments, mere moments, from the final, suffocating darkness. The relief that washed over me was a physical wave, leaving me momentarily weak. The constables let out a ragged cheer, a mixture of triumph and sheer exhaustion. Thomas was carefully lifted out, wrapped in a blanket, and rushed towards the waiting medical team. He was alive. All three were alive. But even in this moment of profound relief, the architect had left his mark. Tucked beneath Thomas's small, blue-painted box, secured with a thin wire, was a final, perfectly typed message. Holmes retrieved it, his gaze cold. "A remarkable display, Mr. Holmes. My congratulations. You are indeed worthy of your reputation. The children live, and for that, London may thank your intellect. Yet, the game is not finished. Not yet. For every truth uncovered, there remains a shadow. For every box opened, there are countless others that remain sealed. Consider this a prelude, Mr. Holmes." The architect merely introduced himself. "Until our next encounter, I remain your devoted antagonist." The message contained no fingerprints, no distinguishing marks. It was a final, chilling taunt, a promise of future torment. The architect was gone, vanished into the labyrinth of the city, leaving behind only the echoes of his cruel game. As the sun fully cleared the horizon, painting the grim expanse of Crossbones in a weak, golden light, Holmes stood motionless, staring at the empty space where the box had been. The frantic energy of the rescue began to subside, replaced by a quiet awe at the near miracle that had just transpired. "A truly extraordinary mind, Watson," Holmes finally said, his voice unusually soft, his gaze distant. "One rarely encounters such a combination of meticulous planning, psychological acumen, and utter ruthlessness. A criminal genius, indeed. And one, I fear, whose acquaintance we have only just begun to make." I looked at my friend, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes burning with an almost fearful respect for his adversary. "But you saved them, Holmes. All 3 children, against impossible odds." "A narrow escape, my dear Watson," he corrected, turning to walk towards the gate, leaving the forgotten graves and the architect's final message behind. "A very narrow escape. The architect allowed us this victory, I believe, not out of magnanimity, but to further test the measure of his opponent. He sought to demonstrate his power, his reach, and the depths of his strategic brilliance. He wished to establish a new order of villainy in London, with me as his foil. The children were eventually reunited with their hysterical, relieved families. London breathed a collective sigh of relief, hailing Sherlock Holmes as its savior. But as we rode back to Baker Street, exhausted but triumphant, I knew that for Holmes, this was no simple victory. He had looked into the abyss of a truly malevolent and brilliant mind, and that mind had looked back. The architect was still out there, a shadow in the depths, and Holmes, as he himself admitted, had merely played the opening moves in a game that was far from over.